Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mediate Guru's 9th International Workshop, which will be conducted on the span of 3 days, starting from June 23rd to July 25th. Today is the second day of the second workshop series, and we hope you enjoy the session. Mediate Guru is a social initiative led by members across the globe. The aim of the organization is to bridge the gap between the general public and litigation. We are creating a social awareness campaign for showcasing mediation as the future, having successfully conducted various international webinars promoting alternative dispute resolution, having a reach in more than 100 countries around the world with an international family growing each day. We thrive to provide you with the best lecture series to the best speakers around the globe so that you have a value addition today. Ms. Winter Wheeler has prepared an overview for the session. She says that the Four Cornerstones of Mediation is a social, emotional, and culturally sensitive mediation methodology. However, this methodology applies not only to mediation, but also to everyday human interaction. And to further this topic, I feel honored today to welcome our esteemed speaker for Session 2 of the International Workshop. Ms. Winter Wheeler is a former top civil litigator who has made her niche as an expert mediator. She sought out for her unique, compassionate, and successful style handling complex matters that involve a diverse range of cultures, including Spanish-speaking clients. Most recently, Winter was a senior attorney at a prominent law firm, and it's this extensive body of experience she brings into her cultural mediation practice that makes her work stand out. A graduate of Georgetown University and Tulane Law School, Winter has always combined her passions for culture, diplomacy, and the law. Winter is the creator of the Four Cornerstones of Mediation, which she introduced to the world in her first TEDx talk on March 2021. She gave her second TEDx talk in June 2021, entitled Confessions of a Working Mom Who Has It All. She is co-authored of the bestselling book, Networked. She is also creator and host of the Mediate Now podcast. She also spends her free time volunteering in her community, enjoying her husband and 4 children, and traveling back to Miami, Florida, where she was raised as much as possible. She is especially passionate about changing the face of mediation and arbitration by bringing compassion and listening to the forefront and placing the litigant and emotions at the center of the conversation. I would request the speaker to take the session forward and enlighten us all. You can ask your questions in the chat box. And please make sure to fill out this attendance form that I'll be adding to the chat for today.
Good. Oh, goodness. I'm saying good morning to you, Frankie, because I know you and I are both in the States. But good evening to, I think, the vast majority of those of you who are watching today. Thank you so much for being here. It is really an honor. I love mediation. It is truly a passion of mine. I think if anybody's been following me on social media, I think you know that. And so to get up early today on a Saturday for me and talk about mediation is actually something that I'm super excited to do. And I just want to thank the organizers for inviting me to be here. I am so proud of the work that I have been doing, especially with the Four Cornerstones of Mediation. And so proud, in fact, that I did prepare a TEDx talk in this regard. And so if you do get a chance to check it out, I hope that you do. You can go on YouTube and search for Winter Wheeler TEDx, and it'll pop up pretty easily. But I know that we don't have a ton of time to go through this today, so I definitely just kind of want to dive in. But what I think needs to happen first, people need to have an understanding of where I come from and kind of like how I got to where I am right now and how I managed to develop this particular theory. I grew up in Miami, Florida, in the United States. It's a very international city. I went to an international high school. I was surrounded by people from various countries. And, you know, a lot of them did not speak English when they arrived. And in order for all of us to get along, we all had to start learning each other's languages and learning each other's cultural norms and figure out what we needed to do to be able to get along with each other. And that has really shaped every part of my life. Truly, truly, truly. And so when I was about 14 years old, I decided I wanted to go into the Foreign Service. My experience in school made very clear to me that we were having miscommunication. There was a disconnect in what was going on, and sometimes there were arguments over things that did not need to be arguments, simply because someone misinterpreted someone's cultural reference, or misinterpreted, someone looking someone in the eye or not looking someone in the eye. And so with that, I wanted to start studying more and more about other cultures and helping to bridge that gap. And that was, like I said, very early on in my career. I ended up going to Georgetown University. I attended the School of Foreign Service, where they focus very heavily on that, because they're getting kids ready to go out into the world and represent the United States in foreign service, and trying to bridge those gaps in a peaceful way with other countries and other cultures. And so that is kind of how I started on this path. And, having grown up in South Florida, in that community, that very, very multicultural international community, I took for granted people's willingness or genuine awareness of it and what needed to be done to bridge those gaps. And then, I moved several places, but I moved to Madrid, Spain for a while, where the population was not so international. They were definitely more of a homogenous society. And I personally had a lot of difficulty there. I struggled a lot. People were not very interested in learning about me and my culture and trying to help me adapt to their culture, even though I was clearly there to learn about them. They seemed to want me to know exactly what was going on, despite the fact that no one was trying to help me along the way. But that was a long time ago. I'm good. I'm not upset about that. So anyway, I realized that in order for all of us to get along, we needed to start focusing on our cultural differences and how we can accommodate each other. And the key here is that those of us who are aware, sensitive enough to be aware of the differences that we have, we're the ones who are going to lead the charge here, right? So if you are listening to this presentation this morning or this afternoon for y'all, you probably fall into that category, and you want to be able to work with people and help bridge those gaps. So with that said, that general background, I'm going to give you an overview of the Four Cornerstones of Mediation. So let's see, let me start this PowerPoint here. Oh, no, that's all right. I seem to have jumped into the wrong portion of the PowerPoint and not just the beginning. Okay, so let me stop here. Sorry about that. When I look at it, it's starting at the beginning, but then it doesn't pull up as the beginning. Hold on. Okay, here we go. Thank you. All right. So just generally this first slide, this is me, Winter Wheeler Mediation and Arbitration, and where you can find me: LinkedIn, Instagram, my podcast. It's called The Mediate Now. You find me at themediatenow.com and winterwheeler.com. If you want to reach out directly, you can find me at winterwheeler.com. A recipe for success, the Four Cornerstones of Mediation. This truly is a methodology that will bring you success. It has not failed me yet. Does everything settle? Of course not, because, you know, at the end of the day, we're talking about numbers. But what we want to do is make sure people are feeling respected. And when we do that, we have a lot of success. And we eventually do get people to settle. So what is mediation? Mediation here in the US, the American Bar Association defines mediation as a private process where a neutral third person called a mediator helps the parties discuss and try to resolve the dispute. The parties have the opportunity to describe the issues, discuss their interests, understandings, and feelings, provide each other with information, and explore ideas for the resolution of the dispute. And I mean, this is a good definition, and frankly, better than I thought it was going to be when I first came across it. But it takes into account, you know, people's feelings and, you know, how they're seeing the world. But for me, is this like truncated for anyone else? Can someone tell me in the chat? Or is that just happening here on my end? I really can't tell. I can't, like, because I can't see the full slide for some reason. I'm not sure why. Okay, let's see. So how do I define mediation? Mediations are a series of uncomfortable conversations. And I consider that to be the absolute truth. It's important because you want to make sure your client understands exactly what they're getting into when they come into a mediation. And it really helps those who are less familiar with the process to understand what's going to happen on mediation day. Some people come in believing that they're going to steamroll over their opposition. And that is definitely not what happens. You know, you can do mediation several different ways. When I'm doing a mediation, I typically keep the opposing parties apart, except for one joint session where we all meet together. And I do that because I do not want any arguing. Typically, people come to mediation because there has been a lot of arguing, and I don't want to see that continue. I am a mediator. I'm not a referee. So I try to avoid all fights between the parties themselves. Any kind of argument that needs to happen through me. And that argument is going to be filtered in such a way that it is no longer an argument. It is going to be a very rational conversation based in how people feel, of course, but also the law, the evidence, and what might be able to be proven, and, you know, what a jury might see if they receive this case and are asked to decide on it. Okay. No, seriously, can y'all see the whole slide, or is that just a problem I'm having on my end?
We can all see the slides. They look good.
Okay, thank you. So a mediator needs to be ready to handle any cultural, ethnic, gender, etc. nuances that might arise. Now, we can't expect every mediator to know or understand every potential nuance that might arise between any infinite number of people, right? That's impossible. But what you don't want is for your mediator to be lacking in social emotional intelligence and cultural awareness. They need to at least know that there's an issue and be able to address it or figure out how to address it and in a sensitive manner. You don't want your mediator to potentially derail a case, that an attorney has been working on for a year or more. And you certainly don't want to be in a position where your client is offended if you're the attorney, and you don't even know that your client is offended. I've seen that go down, and it's not good. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I have seen cases where because I live in Atlanta, right? So Atlanta is a very multicultural city. It's a pretty big city for America. We have several million people here and in the surrounding areas. And we come from all walks of life. So we have lots of African Americans, we have lots of Asian Americans. And I say Asian Americans, which of course covers the gamut of Asian Americans. We have from Southern Asia, Eastern Asia, everywhere. And so we are talking about people from everywhere, right? So it would almost be impossible to learn absolutely everything. So what I say is, what you need to do if you are in a position where you have people from various cultures and you know that you're potentially going to be working with people heavily from those cultures, focus on what they might need and what's going to be best for them. If there's any dialect distinction that you might need to know that's important, try to focus on things like that. If there's any gestures that might be offensive, learn those things. So my favorite example that I like to give is about African American vernacular English. We call it AAVE for short. And so I had a case where we had a native African American vernacular English speaker, and his attorney did not speak AAVE. And so the problem, though, was that the attorney didn't respect that AAVE was a dialect distinct from his own. And he just assumed that he understood what his client was saying. He did not. Okay. The AAVE dialect is marked by many, many nuances, and a lot of them can, for example, the double negative. So unfortunately, crucial facts had been misunderstood. The attorney took a double negative to be a positive, when in fact the double negative was actually a negative. So now what I don't want you to take away from what I said, because it's the opposite of what I'm saying, is to rely on any type of stereotype. Because just because someone of a certain cultural background shows up, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to speak to you in any particular dialect. You've got to remain flexible about what you're doing with them, right? It's not that if you have a Korean plaintiff, you need a Korean mediator. That's not going to work. That is far more nuanced than that, and we can talk about that if we have time. So I already pulled this up here on the slide, but one of my favorite Brené Brown quotes ever is that in order to empathize with someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how you imagine their experience to be. And this is so important, and it completely underpins my entire philosophy. And if you can really live that quote, you're going to get so much farther in your mediation career and so much more quickly, because you have to take yourself out of the equation. You have to take a lot of the legal positions out of the equation and just start to relate to what you are being told and how that person feels. and make sure that they know that they are feeling heard. And so I would love for you to watch my first TED Talk. It is called Mastering the Art of the Uncomfortable Conversation, and it gets into this in a lot more detail. So when we talk about mastering the art of the uncomfortable conversation, we're talking about using your social, emotional, and cultural acumen to connect with the parties, with the litigants. To a certain extent, this needs to happen with the lawyers if the parties are represented as well. And so without further ado, the methodology, those four cornerstones are emotional intelligence, cultural knowledge, cultural immersion, and genuine empathy. And so we've kind of touched on each of those as I've given you the background on how I got to this methodology. And so I came to these four particular issues through the course of my practice, through interacting with the parties, seeing what best helped them to work through their emotional issues, and to be in a position to make decisions and reach a settlement, or to meaningfully engage in the process in pursuit of whatever particular end was sought, whatever that was, whether it was to settle the matter, seek informal discovery, do some fact finding, whatever. And what I really began to notice is this. Certainly the parties are arguing over money, but it is always about underlying feelings and emotions, no matter what the subject matter is. It could be what looks like a very basic contract dispute, business dispute that should be resolved based just on, I'm going to pay you X because I owe you X. But there's always something else going on underneath. So I began to explore different techniques and methods, and they, all of them nameless. I'm just kind of going through and trying different things. And suddenly my clients were having breakthroughs, right? And so what I do in my practice is I encourage the parties to tell me about their negative feelings. I want to know why they feel that way. And I want to know what else has happened to cause their current emotional state. And when the parties are willing to engage in that exercise, I start to see those breakthroughs. And so, I use this methodology in my personal life as well. And I've seen improvements in all areas with my family, my friends, even my children. So the four cornerstones are definitely the foundation of an effective, uncomfortable conversation, no matter who you're dealing with. So are there any questions before I get into each cornerstone in further depth? It doesn't seem like there are. Okay, perfect. Let's see. Emotional intelligence. That's our first cornerstone. So what is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence concerns whether we are fully aware of our own feelings and whether we allow that awareness to control the way in which we lead our lives. And I think at this point, we've all heard the phrase emotional intelligence. It's quickly become the measure of a person. And primarily, emotional intelligence concerns whether we're fully aware of our own feelings and whether we allow that awareness to control the way in which we lead our own lives. Now, it also concerns whether or not we're able to regulate and control our own emotions. And it becomes important because people don't tell you how they feel. They either don't know or they don't want to tell you, right? And so when you're in a mediation, you need to know how people are feeling. You need to know how you're feeling because you don't want to conflate how you feel with how they feel. As a mediator, you're a neutral. And of course, we all have human feelings. So once you've identified what your feelings are, you can isolate them and you can distinguish them from the feelings of other people. And so one way I like to encourage people to evaluate their own emotional intelligence is by asking themselves a series of questions. And I really want you to think about these as we're going through, maybe even write them down to look at later, because they're pretty hefty questions, right? Can you identify your own feelings? Do your feelings help guide your decisions? And do you understand how your emotions fit with the people and happenings around you? And can you use that information to relate and properly interact with others? Now, it's clearly a lot to think about because this is happening. These things are happening whether you realize it or not during every interaction that we have. But for a lot of people, this happens for them without any thought whatsoever. I happen to luckily be one of those people. I've worked on it for quite a while, so it's not like I just popped up and I was able to do this. No, I've worked on it. And so I definitely think that we can improve upon this if we don't have it naturally. But again, there are differing opinions on that. So if anybody has another opinion, please let me know and put that in the chat. So as far as examples of emotional intelligence, if I know something or a certain situation is going to upset me or put me on edge, how am I going to handle it? Do I try to address those thoughts ahead of time so that I can prepare my reaction when the time comes? Or am I just going to barrel full steam ahead without regard to what my action may mean to anyone who's around me? Or similarly, if I know I want to do something and it's going to upset someone else, do I try to approach it in a way that will be least offensive while still being honest? And do I brace myself for the reaction and anticipate how to maintain my composure while that situation is going on? And so those are a lot of questions. But it's really about, do you know how you feel and do you care about how you are received by other people? Just in your general life, you should want to be concerned with how other people view you. And not because you should care about what they think about you, but mainly because you want to be in control of your own narrative, right? You don't want anyone having a misconception about you because you're having a bad day. Now, does that happen? Of course it does. You find someone on a bad day and you may think they're a terribly rude person, but you dig a little bit deeper and maybe their child had been in an accident and they are focused only on that. They don't have time to deal with anything else and they're not going to speak to you. They may not even actually see you because they are tunnel vision on what's happening with their child, right? So, of course, we have to give people leeway and grace when we're going through this and when we're dealing with it. But these are the questions that we need to be asking of ourselves, especially while we're mediating. When we're in that context of being the mediator, we are the neutral. We want to make sure that we have a handle on our emotions and our responses, because we don't want anything to cloud how we might respond. And we certainly don't want anyone to think that we are biased at any point, because that's going to get you in trouble. Okay. Any questions on that? Listen, yes?
We actually do have one question.
Okay.
So sometimes dealing with people can be a really controversial issue. So how can you become aware that your clients are getting irritated or really unhappy with the mediation process if they don't have any outward indicators of unhappiness?
Ask them. Ask them. I had someone recently ask me, how do you make sure you don't offend people when you're telling them the truth about their case? And the answer is, don't be so worried about offending them. Set them up in advance and let them know you're going to hear me say some things that you're not going to like. You're not going to agree with everything that I say. However, I am a neutral party, and I promise you I will remain neutral. But I will not be doing my job if I don't tell you the truth about what I think is going on and what I think is happening in, with the other parties. And continue to ask them. Let them know that they're in a safe space where they can get upset. So I am constantly asking my clients to check in with themselves, and I ask them how they're feeling the entire time. I tell them, when we start, if we're talking about, the person who's brought the lawsuit, who feels that they have been aggrieved, I start by saying, we're here today for you. This is about you. This is your day. Today is the day that you get to tell us what you need to tell us. You get to be as upset as you want to be. And that gives people a lot of freedom, because typically no one's heard that before. We're always told the opposite, right? In our lives, that we need to keep it under control, and we need to be polite, and we need to not let everyone know how upset we are. Well, in mediation, it's very different. What we want to see and encourage people and tell them this, we want to see you move on with your life and to feel whole. I don't want someone to leave mediation, perhaps with a settlement that they're still not happy with. Or I take that back, that they're not satisfied with. Leaving a mediation happy is probably not what happens, right? Happiness isn't necessarily the goal. It's closure and satisfaction. But if they can't be satisfied with the settlement because they're angry about things that they have not let out and that we haven't been able to address, that's not helpful. So sometimes they're upset about something that I can address as part of the mediation, and we can handle that. And it could be potentially a non-monetary term in the settlement. Or sometimes people feel better just because I sat and I listened and I let them cry and I let them vent. Some mediations, if someone is extremely emotional, I might spend the first full hour just letting them cry on my shoulder and telling them that it's going to be okay and we're going to work through it. Obviously, I'm not a therapist or anything of the sort, but just having empathy and showing them that, everybody who's there is there to help them resolve the problem, and to move so that they can move on with their life and putting this issue behind is really a great way to get started. I hope that answers the question. If there's a follow-up to that, let me know. So our next slide here, cultural knowledge. And this is a really, really important one, especially if you live in a diverse area or if you want to work with diverse people, especially now when we're able to do mediation, by Zoom. We're dealing with people from everywhere, right? From across the world. And so we need to be ready to do that. So cultural knowledge is knowledge of the norms and the values that a given culture holds. And so, in other words, how do one's peers within a given culture expect one to behave? And that seems easy, but it's hard for someone who's not in that culture to adapt out of their own culture and then learn another culture. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience, not only from the person trying to learn, but from those they're trying to learn from. So we can get cultural knowledge straight from books, right? We can read and learn about cultural norms and educate ourselves to the extent that we want or that we need. And so, like I said earlier, in my work, I see people from all different communities. And so I focus on maintaining my cultural knowledge and awareness of the communities and the cultures that I see most often in my practice. And I do that by, well, first of all, having a lot of contacts and a lot of friends who are who exist in those cultures and who are also attorneys, also mediators, and that helps a lot because we're able to exchange information on what might be the best way to approach a certain person in a specific situation. And so if you have that ability, if you have access to people from other cultures, make sure you build those relationships so that you have people that you can rely on and that you can trust to help you do your best, because you really don't want to mess it up. You can certainly go in to a mediation and say, I am not terribly familiar with this, but I have been doing my best to learn. If I do or say anything that is culturally offensive to you, it is completely by accident. And please make me aware of it. Let them know that you're open to being corrected. And I find that a lot of people, if you go in by telling them that, they find that to be very respectful, and they're more likely to continue to stay open to you and the work that you're doing with them. If they know in advance that you might make a mistake, that you might make that mistake, and that you are willing to be corrected and you will apologize and make up for that mistake. So that's very important. And so, the examples that I typically use are pretty simple. Some cultures find direct eye contact disrespectful, right? But here in the United States and in most Western cultures, we find the lack of eye contact disrespectful. At this point in Western culture, we're trying to work toward removing that, because we have obviously people who are neurodivergent, people who simply are uncomfortable with that level of eye contact. But in general, we're looking for eye contact. And that's just something that slowly over time is going to have to change. But until it does, we're stuck with dealing with it, right? Your average person who comes in to mediate a case is not usually very sophisticated. And if that's what they're expecting of you, that's what we need to give them. So, how closely should someone stand next to you? And this has gotten, of course, exceptionally confusing with COVID, because some people are not vaccinated and they don't want you anywhere near them. So I'm asking at this point, are you shaking hands? Because if they're not, they don't want you touching them at all, right? And then there are some people who are fully vaccinated, like myself, and I want all the hugs all the time. So I'm very Southern, and like hugs, and I've missed hugs for over a year. So if you see me in person, I'm very likely to hug you. I'll ask first, but I am very likely to want to give you a hug. And we have, people who nod their head up and down to say yes, and some who nod their head up and down to say no. If you don't know the difference based on who you're dealing with, you can have a very serious miscommunication there. And that would be a huge problem when you're talking about trying to mediate a case. and try to bring people to closure. And then, of course, we have, and see, I can't see what this says. Okay, here we go. Cultural immersion. Now, cultural immersion is full engagement with another culture. It's fully immersing oneself in another culture. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's putting yourself into a position in which you can't consider yourself a stranger to it anymore. And so once we have the cultural knowledge, right, we've got the book learning, we need to apply it. And so that's where cultural immersion comes in. And it's crucial because when we engage with the other cultures, we start to learn how they behave, how they see the world, how they do what they do. And most important, we can learn why they do what they do. And so as mediators, and even if you're an advocate, this is still important. If you don't understand why someone would make the type of decision that they're making, and it doesn't make any sense to you through your personal cultural lens, you're going to be very confused. And so you've got to put yourself in a position in advance to try to see what's important to that culture, not only from a book, but also in play. And if you don't have the opportunity to go visit these cultures or visit with them, and if you have pockets of communities that you can go see, like here in Atlanta, we have like a section of town that is very heavily influenced by many, many different Asian cultures, right? So there will be a section of town that is focused on a Filipino community and Filipino cuisine and Filipino cultural events. And then down the way, that might be a Korean community doing the same thing, and a Japanese community, and so on and so on and so on. And so we are very lucky that we have that ability. I can literally get in my car, drive 40 minutes, and I can go do this, and I can have these conversations, and I can learn more and more every time I go, so that I can continue to help my clients. But you can do that too, thanks to the World Wide Web here, by meeting pen pals. Do we still use the term pen pal at this point? But by meeting people online, meeting people through LinkedIn, people are very open to doing cultural exchanges. They want to learn more about other people just as much as everyone else does. So that's another thing that I like to do. I did a study abroad. I lived in Madrid for about a year and a half. And so I'm very comfortable with Spanish people. And then, of course, growing up in Miami, we have a strong Latin community. And so I'm very comfortable with people of various Latin descent. So, it's all about what you can do and what you have access to. So yeah, I briefly touched on this already. Good examples of this is study abroad programs. If you can't drop what you're doing and go take a sabbatical, seek out television shows, music, literature. And if you do have those cultural pockets within your own community, go and spend time in them and see what you can learn from them. You want to use that knowledge just to get a broader outlook on life and the world, and, hopefully in a very non-judgmental way. I think the fact that you're listening to this talk right now means you want to do that in a non-judgmental way, and you can definitely do it. You'll learn a whole lot from it, and it'll change your life across the board, and not just in the context of mediation. And then, again, if you do have limited time or limited access, focus very heavily on the communities with which you have the most frequent interaction, or will, in your business. So yeah, once you get over kind of being shy about putting yourself out there and and being a stranger, so to speak, to start with, it gets a lot easier, and it starts to be a lot of fun to just learn about other people. Genuine empathy. I know we're starting to get short on time, so I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly. So empathy is having genuine concern for others and their well-being. Now, genuine empathy, I use that descriptor because I think that there's a big difference between genuine and feigned empathy. I'm lucky to have a very strong sense of genuine empathy, and it has served me quite well. But when I was a practicing attorney, when I was litigating, I spent most of my career as a civil defense attorney. I was warned that being empathetic could affect how I worked my cases. I don't believe that now. I don't think I believed it back then, but I was cognizant about it. I paid very close attention to making sure that I didn't let my empathy for any of the parties sway me in any direction. And so now that I'm a mediator, and I know I need to have empathy for everyone who is involved, because in this context, the empathy is the understanding of where everyone is coming from, how they feel, and why they feel a certain way. And so I was teaching this class earlier this week, and one of the students suggested that we shouldn't feel empathy or sympathy for people because that can sway us as mediators, as neutrals. And, my response to him was mainly that, our job is to remain neutral. And every neutral I've ever met has taken that very, very seriously. And I've never seen a problem with this. But that if you don't care about the people that you are working with, you can't really get into the issues that matter to them. And if you can never dive into those issues, you're never really able to help them. People come to us with, complaining about monetary trouble, right? So-and-so stole this money from me. So-and-so did this to me. But typically, it's not just about money. There's always something else going on. So if we can get into that, if we can get into what else is going on, and we can only do that by actually caring and asking the questions in such a way that they can feel that we actually care, we're not going to get very far. We're not going to have people who are happy with whatever settlement they come up with. Now, that's my opinion on that. That's certainly up for debate. And there's also, of course, debate on whether empathy can be learned or improved upon. I'm not sure it can. I think if it can be learned and improved upon, it happens in childhood. That's something we probably learn from our parents in infancy and how we're cared for and whatnot. That's likely where it comes from. But again, that's my opinion. So if anybody has another opinion on that, I'd love to hear it. But if it is something that you think that you need to learn or to improve upon, go ahead and try to do it. It can work. If it works, email me and let me know. I'm open to changing my mind on that. Let's see. So I spoke earlier about encouraging litigants and sometimes the attorneys to tell me what's going on in their lives. People bring their full selves to mediation. It's not just the part of them that is relevant to the case at hand. We're the sum total of everything that has ever happened to us. And so all of that comes into the mediation room. And sometimes those extra things have to be addressed before we can get to the root of what's keeping this particular issue from settling. And it's been especially difficult as the pandemic has been raging on because people are showing up with a lot of grief. And so not just grief for whatever prompted that mediation, but grief over job lost, jobs lost, lost homes, lost loved ones. The parties will come in and often tell me that they feel their attorneys haven't been listening to them in their emotional problems, that the attorneys haven't cared about what's been going on in their lives. And honestly, I was like that as a litigator too. I didn't have time to listen to every complaint that my client wanted to discuss. I just simply didn't. I had too many clients. I didn't think it was anything that, it didn't change anything about the evaluation of the claim or the lawsuit. It didn't affect the dollar value of the case. But now I see that it potentially had effect on what my client was willing to do for the settlement, or what the plaintiff was willing to accept for the settlement. And so now I help them work through that. I engage them in conversation, ask what's going on. Is something else bothering them? What else is the matter? What's making this extra hard for them? So, I'm not a psychologist by any stretch, but that's not necessary for this purpose. What we need to accomplish is letting them know that they're being listened to, that they're being heard. And really, that's all anybody wants. And so typically, once I've made clear that I care and that I want to hear what they have to say, they open up and they tell me what I need to know in order to help them move forward. So that's a huge piece of this. That way we can move forward from what they believe they want and get them focused on what they need out of the mediation, because those are typically two very different things. I hate that old saying that, the sign of a good mediation or a negotiation is that everyone leaves upset. And I mentioned this briefly before that, I think that that's nonsense. I think everyone should leave satisfied. Satisfaction isn't happiness. It's not sadness, but it's knowing that you have gone through the process, having had your say, having had someone listen, having had someone validate it. And ultimately, it's about knowing that you were understood and that you connected with your mediator. So why are the four cornerstones of mediation crucial? It's really because of everything that I've said. You have to create a situation in which the client is comfortable. If they're not comfortable, perhaps they don't trust you as much as they should. If they don't trust the mediator, they're in a position in which they start out feeling like no one is on their side. Now, as a mediator, you go in and you tell them that you're not on their side. You're honest with them. But you do need a rapport with them. You have to have that rapport. These people, they go into this situation feeling that everyone is their adversary and that they have to make all the hard decisions alone. And that's simply not true. They can feel as though they're not being listened to or respected, that their experiences aren't being appreciated. But if you can implement the four cornerstones, you can eliminate much, if not all, of this uncertainty. Now, some aspect of the methodology will certainly speak to your litigant and help you get where you need them to be in order to settle your case. But you won't get there if they don't trust you. If they don't trust you as the mediator, if they don't trust the process, you will not get there. Increased social, emotional, and cultural intelligence will positively and predictably impact the outcomes of mediations in terms of party satisfaction and decreased instances of parties suffering from buyer's remorse after settlement. And I certainly saw that in practice when I was a lawyer. A plaintiff would be upset about something and feel overwhelmed, like no one was caring about what they were going through. But then they would agree to the settlement, only to claim right after signing it that they weren't sure they should have done it. Well, in the types of cases I had, it was too late. It didn't matter. And then, of course, my opposing counsel was faced with having to control that issue and try to avoid a legal malpractice claim against them. They didn't want to be sued by their own client. And so I've seen this pop up in mediations, and we work extremely hard to re-empower the parties and remind them that, mediation day is their day and that we're there for them and for no other reason than to help them find closure. And since I have put the Four Cornerstones into practice to some extent in each mediation, my mediations have been far less dramatic. In the absence of the Four Cornerstones, we risk inadvertently offending, insulting, and alienating the parties. In a nutshell, derailing your case. You don't want your case, if you're the attorney, you don't want your case that you've been working on for a year, however long, to be derailed by a mediator unwittingly causing offense, either through misunderstanding or miscommunicating. Imagine that you get that far and your settlement isn't possible because your mediator made a party angry, right? That mediator is not going to get used. They're not going to get used. Now, how the mediator's usage of the Four Cornerstones can make or break your case. Oh goodness, let me skim through this really quickly because I know we definitely want time for questions. Quickly, my favorite example of a mediator destroying a case that I had personally worked on as an attorney for about a year. It was one of the last cases I mediated as an advocate. I represented a defendant in an extremely contentious case. It was really emotional for my client, and I had gotten very attached to the case as well. And we worked tirelessly on his defense. And we realized mediation would probably be a good option, but we went to the mediation and the mediator was horrendous at best. He refused to listen to our side. He clearly made up his mind without digging into the case. And he made me and my client very upset due to his treatment of us. And, we felt completely steamrolled. So do you think that case settled that day? Of course not. So the plaintiff was happy that the mediator agreed with him during the process, but the plaintiff was not happy to find out that the case didn't settle because of the mediator's terribly alienating behavior. And so quickly, how do you know if a mediator is best for your case? Evaluate your case, evaluate the players, consider the facts, the theories. Do you have emotional parties? Do you have a case where a certain type of person might be necessary? I'm going to go ahead and skip through this last part so that we have time for questions. If there are questions, please let me know. I do hope that you've learned something and got some new ideas about how to look at your mediations. Please do reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, at my websites. I'll pop those into the chat. I am launching an in-depth educational class here. It's going to be a certification class in the Four Cornerstones of Mediation. And so hopefully I'll see some of y'all there. The first class will be at the end of September, and there will be more information coming out about that. But thank you so much for watching today, and thank you to all of our organizers for having me here. This has been really fun. I love talking about mediation. I could talk about it all the time.
So there are some questions from the chat. Would you like to answer a few?
Sure.
Okay. One person would like to know if mediation has to be worked into a contract in order for it to go there, or can people voluntarily start up mediation? You can voluntarily do it. Some contracts do have mediation. If you can be integral in creating those contracts or writing those contracts, it is nice to put that clause in there because it's, mediation is growing in such popularity.
But yes, you can always volunteer to do it. A lot of contracts will include arbitration clauses, so be aware of that. Typically, people are open to doing mediation before they'll go ahead with an arbitration because mediation is so much easier and cheaper.
Okay. Another person would like to know what the difference between cultural knowledge and cultural immersion is.
Okay. Cultural knowledge is like the book learning aspect of it. So if you can pick up a book and it says this culture is focused on these types of things, these are things that are important in that culture. Great. That sounds fantastic. Once you've learned that kind of basic information, you need to go and put it into practice. And you can only put it into practice by being present with people of that culture. So, for example, I learned Spanish in school from books, from television. But then when I moved to Spain, I was no longer a stranger in that country. I became a resident. I directly matriculated into a Spanish university, and I became part of Spanish society, which put me into a position to really learn how they ticked. All of my friends were Spanish, and so it's a very different scenario when you're talking about generally picking up a book and kind of learning what some scholar has decided you needed to know about a culture, and then actually seeing what they do in practice.
Awesome. And there's one more. Do you think that there is some kind of internal issues that might present themselves in cases that can turn out to be really huge or potentially derail mediation, aside from not understanding where the other person is coming from?
You mean like generally, are there issues that can come up? Is that what the question is?
Like generally, like, do you see a lot of small things that start out and you're kind of like, oh, that's a red flag because it might blow up later, but nobody realizes it quite right away?
Oh, yeah, all the time. The example I use most of the time when people ask me this question, I had a case where a plaintiff she'd sued a shopping center for not having enough security, and she was robbed at the shopping center, and she was injured as a result of this robbery. And so she sued a major coffee chain based on the location of where she was in the shopping center. Well, her attorney just kind of took her word for where she was in the shopping center and what she'd been doing that day. But then during the course of the mediation, as I'm asking her questions and her lawyer is, freely allowing her to answer them, it turns out that she was actually not by that location where she said she was. She was in a completely different part of the plaza, which ultimately meant she'd sued the wrong entity, and the statute of limitations had expired. So that was a huge derailment of that case. Things went completely awry. Yeah. So, I mean, we have things like that pop up all the time. Just yesterday, I had a case where it's the defendant thought that they had a slam dunk case. And then in the middle of mediation, we got a copy of a judge's order that directly affected whether or not the defendant was going to be able to use their expert. And it looked like, no, they weren't. And so this case tripled in value while we sat there. So, things come up and kind of, change things dramatically. Can we still get them done? Yes. When those types of surprises come up, it's typically best to go ahead and handle it in the mediation, because if you let them leave, those things just get more expensive.
And then lastly, do you see cases where you should not consider mediation at all?
Yes, I do. Unfortunately, though, sometimes you don't know that until you get there. And it's like, okay, we're actually not ready to mediate this. Or if it's a situation where a party is, the parties are divorcing, and there might be issues of domestic violence or intimidation going on that weren't readily apparent before we got into the mediation, and then it becomes very apparent. You know, I mean, I'm trained in that. I'm certified in spotting those issues, and you know, we have to stop those mediations. We end them.
Okay, so that looks like those are all the questions that we have for today. And on behalf of myself and all the participants today, we just wanted to thank you so much for giving such a wonderful, informative presentation. I'm sure a lot of people learned a lot of things today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
And then before concluding today's session, I just want to take the opportunity to introduce the International Arbitration Moot Court Competition that will be hosted by Mediate Guru this upcoming September. The registrations are open for arbitration enthusiasts from all across the globe, and it will be a landmark opportunity to learn the practical insights of arbitration. For more information, don't forget to visit www.mediateguru.com. And I would request that everybody please fill out the feedback form before you leave in order to receive your certificates. And if you don't want to miss any updates from Mediate Guru, please follow our social media handles and also join on the WhatsApp updates group in the chat box. Stay healthy, stay safe, and see you all soon. Thank you to all.